All right, welcome to another lecture for 1060 Online. What we're going to look at today is just a few kind of component issues. Now, you're not going to use all of these for your Essay 2, but it's going to be very important for Essay 3 and 4. And so what we're doing today is really comparing and contrasting, You know, why we have that process. And obviously, already for some of the drafts I've seen for Essay 2, we want to look at why we use compare and contrast as a process. So it's really just a guide to one of the most popular academic activities, as I say, of course, besides trying to insult people with intelligent language who don't realize they're being insulted. Academics love doing that activity as well sometimes. So what we're looking at when we do compare and contrast essays, there's a specific purpose for that. This genre of academic writing exists in order to add, oh, that should be ADD, excuse me, add meaning to subjects or objects in which inherent similarities and differences help us determine new ideas or knowledge. In fact, comparative thinking is one of our first and most natural forms of thought. So this should actually come more natural to us, even though this is a process of analysis. And analysis, as we discussed in previous lectures, is a little tough sometimes. But scientists point out that when we are infants, one of the first differences we must identify is between our mother and other people. And so, like this guy. So even when we're babies, we're making distinctions between people already. We're comparing and contrasting. Our inherent minds, right, our developing minds automatically compare and contrast safe people versus scary people. And again, we do this on purely physical, visceral reactions. We're not intelligent enough yet to know otherwise. And so, you know, we're already forming a very natural way of analyzing the world through compare and contrast. If people are similar to our mother, well then they're safe. If they're not, well then we get scared. This may also explain a biological reason why racism will probably always exist, even though it's a very vicious prejudice. But, you know, in our minds, we are inherently making these compare and contrast decisions. Now, when we get into the intellectual level, we want to go beyond, of course, the visceral, beyond the kind of innate reaction. And so here's the purpose, right? So when we're in this type of setting, educator Harvey Silver argues that without the ability to make comparisons, to set one object or idea against another, and take note of similarities and differences, much of what we call learning would quite literally be impossible. And this is important, right? Because the critical exercise of compare and contrast helps us in our daily lives to make all sorts of decisions between choosing food, you know, which ones you're going to help us, which college we should go to. You know, when think about just why you went to UNCP. Even if it was a financial reason, you're still thinking about, you still have ideals, right? What your ideal college would be, what your backup, you probably had a backup college, So we're making compare and contrasts all the time. Maybe UNCP was your backup schools. Even political views, right? We have all sorts of compare and contrast decisions that we make on a daily basis to figure out what's good for us, what's bad for us, to figure out what we want to believe in, what makes sense to us, all sorts of issues, right? We really use compare and contrast on a daily basis, right, to come to decisions, and we look at similarities and we look at differences. So, in terms of the academic setting, right, beyond the daily setting, right, we also, of course, always want to be as logical as possible. So, in academia, all fields practice some form of compare and contrast within various compositions, right? So, let's say in film studies, you may compare and contrast movies with their book origins. In science, you may test how bodies react to different drugs. In culinary arts, you may experiment with different spices for the same dish, right? How does fish taste with mustard base versus ketchup based, all sorts of, or versus mayonnaise based, all sorts of crazy compare and contrast issues. In literary studies, you compare works with similar themes or works by the same author. And so regardless of the objects, the same pattern applies to how you conduct such an investigation on the page. Same thing with essay 2. You are comparing and contrasting answers. Not so much during the essay, but as you process the information, once you collect all the data, you're going to have to make comparisons and contrasts. You're going to have to look for patterns. And you're going to have to determine what kind of argument you could make based on the responses. And so you're doing this through the analytical process of compare and contrast. Now, two main types of organization exist for compare and contrast essays. And you could kind of use the second one especially, um, and even the first one I've seen for essay 2. The one arrangement is called the block arrangement, and you could see it in this graph, like kind of table chart here. You have your introduction, of course, and let's say we're going to compare Yahoo and MSN home pages, right? So the introduction, right, you would state your purpose, right, which is to discuss similarities and differences, let's say, between Yahoo and MSN. You would discuss Yahoo's layout in one paragraph, then Yahoo's headlines in another, then Yahoo's images in another. And then in the next paragraph, when you start talking first about MSN's layout, you're going to make direct comparisons. And then you talk about MSN's headline and then make direct comparisons. And then MSN's images and make direct comparisons. And then in the conclusion, you discuss the significance of these similarities and differences. So this is the kind of block arrangement. You have introduction of both objects you're going to analyze. One paragraph, two paragraph, three paragraph on the first object. Fifth paragraph, sixth paragraph, seventh on the second object, and in your conclusion. So you could kind of use, obviously, that would be way too much for essay 2 in terms of 3 paragraphs per person. But you could kind of do this, and you will be doing this kind of block arrangement, perhaps, when you have the people for essay 2, when you start analyzing. The other one is point-by-point or alternating arrangement, and this would look like this kind of aspect. So our introduction is obviously the same. But what we do here, and again, note the paragraphs, we still have, 6 main supporting paragraphs, right? But what we're doing here is something a little bit different. So obviously you introduce, and that's going to be the same. But then in the first supporting paragraph, you draw the similarities between the layouts of Yahoo and MSN. You make an argument about the differences between the layouts. In the next paragraph is the similarities between the headlines, and then the differences between the headlines in the next paragraph. Your fifth paragraph, of course, will be the similarities between the images, and then the sixth will logically follow the differences between the images in the same paragraph. And the conclusion, of course, is the same, right? The intro and conclusion do not change at all in terms of purpose and scope. You want to discuss the significance in the conclusion, make an analytical argument about the websites in your introduction. So what we have here is a very important kind of structure, right? And you could see how both of them make logical sense. It all depends on, what you think is more appropriate for the information you have. And so these two arrangements will help you. And when we get even into the larger research projects like Essay 3 and Essay 4, you could really use the block arrangement and the point-by-point structure to help you base arguments. And so whatever you think is the best kind of solution for your information. Again, each one can work and really is dependent on style and logical progression. What do you think makes the most sense, right? Is it more logical for you to talk about Yahoo first and then MSN with direct comparisons, or start those comparisons back to back, right, point by point? And so, it's not really anything absolute, right? There's not going to be one that's better than the other. One will just be more appropriate depending on the information you have. So, understanding similarities and differences, again, helps us connect ideas together, and that's the main purpose, right? We are connecting ideas. We can learn about new information by using compare and contrast with concepts we know more about, right? If you're not sure of one concept, you kind of use, and this is the whole learning process, you use the previous one you understand to help out. So being able to compare and contrast helps us to make a better decision when choosing between two or more ideas. And that's the issue, right? We compare and contrast the advantages, disadvantages of almost any decision in our daily lives, especially the ones that are going to affect us for years to come. Obviously, if you have any questions, always email. If not, again, good luck finishing up Essay 2, and take care.